Thank you. That was so nice, and you don't even know me. Thank you so much. Remembering is not enough, but it's a very good beginning. In 1981, Michael Donald was found hanging from a tree. 1981. 19-year-old Michael Donald was a student, a son, a brother, a nephew. He was a victim. He was abducted by two men who belonged to a group called the United Klans of America. They tricked him, pulled him into the car, took him to a remote location, beat him, cut his throat, then brought him back and hung him from a tree in a residential area in Midtown Mobile, Alabama. 1981. The two men who abducted Michael Donald were eventually arrested and convicted. But the founder of the Southern Poverty Law Center, Morris Dees, wanted the Klan itself, and in particular its leader, Grand Wizard Robert Shelton, to be held responsible. So the center endeavored on this new legal strategy to sue the Klan in civil court and hold them legally responsible. Michael's mom, Mrs. Beulah May Donald, agreed to have the Southern Poverty Law Center represent her. It was incredible. This black woman in Mobile, Alabama, suing a Klan organization. It was a remarkable, remarkable trial. One of the killers, one of the convicted killers, they had been convicted in criminal court by then, served as a witness on our side. He corroborated everything that Morris said he did. And he asked the judge, he said, "May I address Mrs. Donald directly?" The judge said yes. And he looked at Mrs. Donald and he said, I did everything Morris said I did. Everything. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me? Mrs. Donald paused, looked at him, said, "Son, I've already forgiven you." There wasn't a dry eye in the courthouse. Mrs. Donald prevailed in a $7 million judgment against the United Klans of America, bankrupting that organization, preventing them from killing someone else. Not long after the trial was over, Morris and Mrs. Donald were at an NAACP event in Alabama talking about the trial. And Morris, in his talk, he mentioned some of the martyrs from the civil rights movement. He said that Michael Donald's name would be remembered like other civil rights martyrs. People like Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and Viola Liuzzo. After the talk, some young people came up to Morris and said, we recognize Dr. King, but who are these other people? So other young people just began to gather around and said, yeah, who are these people? They had already been lost to history. Emmett Till was 14 years old when he was murdered in Money, Mississippi in 1955. Emmett was from Chicago. His great uncle had been visiting, and he was about to go back to Mississippi, and Emmett wanted to go with him and his cousin. His mother didn't think that was the best idea. She tried to talk to him about the difference between living in middle-class Chicago on the south side and Money, Mississippi. But it's hard to explain that to a 14-year-old boy, so he begged her, and she let him go. 3 days after he was there in Money, Mississippi, he and his friends and cousins went to a store, Bryant's Grocery. They had been picking cotton all day. This was in August. It was hot. They wanted to get something to drink and snacks. They went into the store, and Carol Bryant was the clerk there that day. Her husband owns the store. The kids bought their snacks and left. Sometime thereafter, soon thereafter, we don't know exactly when, Mrs. Bryant accused Emmett Till of flirting with her, or whistling at her, or touching her hand. We don't know. But what we do know is 4 days after that, Emmett Till was kidnapped from his uncle's home at 2:30 in the morning. Mr. Bryant and his brother went into their home and took that boy from his bed. Took him out in the woods somewhere and beat him beyond recognition. It was as if they were trying to deliver a message. Gouged out an eye, pulled out his tongue, then shot him in the head. Tied his body to a cotton gin fan, weighed him down, and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. The uncle reported the kidnapping to the authorities. Took them 3 days to find Emmett's body. The authorities tried to get Emmett's mom to bury him there. Just bury him, just get it over with, let's move on. And she said no. This courageous woman, this mother, who could barely recognize her son, decided that she was going to take his body back to Chicago. She did. She had an open casket, and Emmett Till's body lay in state for 5 days. Over 10,000 people walked in that church and saw Emmett Till's body. Mrs. Till wanted them to see. She said, I want you to face what has happened to my son. See what they did to my son. That courageous act inspired thousands of people to become involved in the civil rights movement, including Rosa Parks. 100 days after Emmett Till's murder is when Mrs. Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery City bus. In her biography, she says, you know, I thought about Emmett Till that day, and I just couldn't move back. Then there are people like Viola Liuzzo. Viola Greg Liuzzo, a white woman from Detroit. She was a mother of five children. But she had a desire to help, to make things right. So one night on the evening news, she saw, oh, am I moving my slides? So sorry. One night on the evening news, she saw some peaceful protesters being beaten on a bridge. Turned out to be Bloody Sunday. You may not know about that. It's when about 600 peaceful protesters attempted to march from Selma to Montgomery and were met by state troopers and beaten back. She saw that on TV and got very upset. She told her husband, I've got to go. I need to help. He said, no, just stay here. A couple days later, on the evening news, she saw that Reverend Reeb, a white minister from Boston, had gone down to Selma to help and was killed. And she said, I have to go. She got in her car, drove by herself from Detroit to Alabama. She got there, she began to help everyone with the march, the next march that they were planning. She would shuttle people back and forth. And once the judge announced that the people had a constitutional right to march from Selma to Montgomery with the protection of the U.S. Army and National Guard, Viola was marching right with them. 4 days later, they ended up in Montgomery. Dr. King delivered that beautiful speech He said, "How long? Not long. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Viola was there. She was so happy. That night after the march, she was still helping people, getting people back home, driving people back to Selma. And she was driving a black man, another one of the civil rights workers, back to Selma. And driving, she noticed someone was following her. This car kept following her. She tried to go faster. The car pulled up right alongside her. They looked at her. She looked at them. And they shot her. Turns out, the car was full of members of the United Klans of America. The same Klan group that killed Michael Donald. Killed Viola Liuzzo. These are the names that Morris was trying to lift up and compare to Michael Donald. So after that speech, and he was driving home, he decided, you know, Southern Poverty Law Center needs to do something to bring these names forward so that young people would understand the sacrifices that were made. So he thought, let's create a memorial, a monument. Called on Maya Lin, the artist and architect who did the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And she was surprised that there wasn't one already. But she said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll create a memorial. And she did. In 1989, the Civil Rights Memorial was dedicated in Montgomery, Alabama. 6,000 people were there. The memorial is beautiful. It's black granite, has water flowing over it. It chronicles the major events of the civil rights movement beginning in 1954 with Brown v. Board and continues on a timeline to 1968 and the assassination of Dr. King. All along that timeline, it names 40 individuals who were killed. We call them martyrs to the movement. Regular people. As Julian Bond said at the dedication, ordinary people who exhibited extraordinary courage. Some were active in the civil rights movement, some were not. Some were like Emmett Till, whose deaths or murders inspired others to be a part of the movement. And some were victims of direct terrorism. They came from all walks of life, students, farmers, homemakers, a Nobel laureate, and Dr. King. A few years later, in the year 2000, someone had found out about the Civil Rights Memorial. His name is Shelton Chappell. And he thought of his mother. And he wanted the center to add his mother's name to the Civil Rights Memorial. Turns out she had been murdered in 1964 in Jacksonville, I believe, Jacksonville, Florida. Just shot, walking home. And of course, you can't add names to the memorial. But we decided we're going to honor her. So we rededicated the memorial in 2000 in the honor of Johnny May Chappelle and all the forgotten others. Because you see, there are more than 40 individuals who were killed during that time. The memorial brings back these names, these stories, these histories, so that history is not lost. On the wall behind the table, Maya Lin etched a quote from a speech that Dr. King delivered. Actually, he delivered the speech during the March on Washington, but it was somewhat of a mantra for him. He also said it during the Montgomery bus boycott. When people think of Dr. King, they think of the I Have a Dream speech. And that was part of the March on Washington. But in 1963, he was upset. People were upset. And he started off his speech saying, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. On the memorial table, Maya Lin left a space between the beginning and the end, between 54 and 68. Open timeline, she calls it. And when you visit the memorial and interact with it, you look down at the water and see yourself reflected back up. It was Maya Lin's hope that as you look down, you contemplate what you're doing to forward the cause of social justice. What would be said about you if your name was etched on the memorial? What are you doing to make justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream? Remembering is not enough. We must dedicate ourselves to the goals for which the civil rights martyrs died. Justice is not rolling down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Not for all of us. So we remember and we move forward. Thank you.